That was my breathy voice. Hey there. Ask
Hey
us.
there.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All right. So we did our cool thing the other day while you were zooming around on taxis and trains and automobiles, planes, trains, and automobiles.
Planes, trains, automobiles, yeah.
There were no planes that day. All right, so let's do a version that we're going to put up for the campers. And so let's go with it. Why don't you give us a quick, there you go, give us a quick little background and, your expertise, and then, where you think this is going and where you want it to go. How's that sound for starters?
That's good.
Or, listen, being that I'm such a professional interviewer, my favorite question is to ask, what question should I be asking? So we could pose that question. How's that? Run with it. You're on.
Okay. Well, I'll just give a quick, little background history on myself regarding my expertise and why I'm having this communication or doing what I'm doing now. I was an officer. I'm not going to give the state out, but I was a police officer for close to 11 years, and I was both a street officer in the beginning, and then I quickly moved into detectives and specialized in narcotics, gangs, and violent crime, those kind of things. So I received a lot of special training into, homicide, violent crime, going to different schools, and also became an undercover officer. So I worked a lot of undercover assignments with, specifically dealing with drugs and gangs and all that kind of stuff. So I worked, So I worked in an area.
I'm just letting everybody know I'm still here. Okay.
So I worked in an area, and I was an officer in the late 90s and through 2000s, and I worked in an area, but a lot of areas are like this. I did have a lot of female officers, so because of that, I was often used to handle sexual assault cases, whether it's rapes or any sexual assault cases, but especially with children. So I'd be called in to do the interviews with small children and working to catch pedophiles and interviewing them, and really the kind of most horrific of all cases that you can work. So I have a lot of experience in that. And so I would be used both at my agency but also throughout the whole state in various task forces and things of that nature, dealing with these type of crimes and other types of crimes. So I kind of traveled around a lot.
Right, and what we said last time is because you were a female. Most sexual assaulters are male, and especially with kids, they were assaulted by a guy, so they don't want to be confronted with a male cop. So instead they have a woman cop and like that, right?
Right. So that's one of the things that is helpful a lot of times when you're interviewing a small child. Is the perpetrators are, I'm not male bashing at all. It's just a reality and a factual reality that most perpetrators are men, and whether the child is boy or girl, and that's just a reality. And so I would be called in to interview these very young children, as young as 3, even younger. I would handle cases of even younger children, but they're not verbal, obviously, but olds and all the way up. And so the interviews, I was trained in interviewing children using anatomically correct dolls and pictures and drawings, and just trained in the techniques of interviewing a child that's been through something like that. And so that also required me to go to physical examinations and speak with doctors and learn a lot about internal injuries and really horrific things that I don't want to go into details about, but I was trained into that kind of stuff, the best kind of stuff.
Right. So were you would see these kids in the hospitals as well?
Yes. And take them there, and it's a very a horrible thing to. Yeah. Okay.
All right, and then you also have a psychology degree, and I think you had said last time that you were, you're not on the force anymore because you experienced, an on-the-job injury, very severe, without going into massive detail. So that was kind of put you out of off the force, right?
Right. So I was without going into detail, I experienced a severe injury, and I could no longer work on the street, and so because of the injury and also because of some other things, I developed post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, which a lot of people know about. And in my own healing process, I thought, well, what if I get my degree in clinical psychology to really understand PTSD, my own PTSD, and also understand, the process of what happens psychologically in the brain. And so I did do that. Went to graduate school and got my master's degree in clinical psychology and worked with a lot of PTSD with soldiers and officers and children and you name it. That was kind of a specialty that I did.
Oh, as a therapist or a counselor?
As a therapist and counselor, right. And I also had my own treatment with PTSD where I was in a unit of soldiers, like battlefield soldiers, but also like I'd say like JSOC or special ops soldiers, and law enforcement officers who had worked really the harder cases, undercover, and the stuff that I had worked. So a lot of the trauma, there's some similarities between some of the and a lot of what I learned was a lot of the PTSD comes from silencing. You're not allowed to really tell your stories, and so it gets trapped inside you. So I learned that in my own case and then studied it, got my degree, and tried to help people unburden themselves. And, that was kind of a journey, my journey.
Excellent.
Right.
Excellent. Yeah, because I know we've heard you talk elsewhere about, some of the stuff you've done to help people, and it's very great, and as we've talked, I don't have a degree in psychology, but I grew up in that environment, with a lot of psychologies and shrinks and whatnot, and in professional capacity, I worked with really top-end shrinks as expert witnesses on some interesting cases, and with my obnoxiously inquisitive mind, I always have to interrogate them, and then, of course, I've done a lot of studying and research on my own, with personality disorders, because you see these in a lot of court cases, and you see that once you're aware of it. And I put out a lot of links to the campers here for the little shaman, who is just one who does some nice stuff, but there are others that I've looked at and researched, and it's amazing, and it's a fascinating thing. And once you're aware of it, you can see it and then know how to handle it. And I've had many viewers comment that listening to her really made them feel better because they thought they were crazy, and the reality is this is a pattern, and this is bullshit that people do, the psychos or the disordered people, and you become a victim of it, and you're made to believe that you're nuts and that they're normal, and it'll just spin you into a negative spiral forever. That's different than PTSD. That's not PTSD.
Yeah. Right, but I think, I would qualify that, and this might help some of your campers to better understand either what they're seeing in other people or even maybe themselves sometimes. A lot of diagnoses that are given by, as you say, it shrinks because they're really just medical doctors who then went on to get a degree in, with brain and chemicals and stuff like that. I'm not a shrink, but a lot of disorders, people get misdiagnosed or labeled, and really what you're looking at is trauma. Even when and I'm not saying that all disorders are this way, but
you're looking at, what did you say? What was the word? Promise?
Trauma. You're looking at trauma, unprocessed
trauma. Right. Okay.
Right. So even people, that go, with personality disorders such as borderline, which is a, kind of an extreme personality disorder, and their behaviors are extreme. But if you are able to understand them from the point of view of them being full of unprocessed trauma, you sometimes can soften your heart towards that. And I'm not saying don't be careful around people like that at all, and don't. But I'm saying I'm saying understand.
You could understand that. You could understand why they're so crazy or so apparently irrational, why they flip-flop. But that doesn't mean you're going to cure them. You're not their savior. You'll go down in flames.
Right. No, they need all the boundaries and all the things that are talked about, but you also, if you can sometimes step back and think about little children that have been so severely traumatized, and then they grow up and they're now in adult bodies, but that childhood trauma is unprocessed within them. So their actions out of that seem extreme and crazy, but it's kind of a way to escape from the pain that's deep inside, I guess.
Right, and that's a perfect segue, because now we're saying those very young age traumas could create the borderline personality disorder.
Absolutely. In fact, they do.
Okay.
That's really what you're dealing with.
Right. So if you're dealing with somebody who's totally whacked, it's probably that they had some horrific childhood traumas.
Yes.
And that ties us into this whole pedophilia thing. And if you remember last time we were talking, and we got great reviews on it, it's a shame we can't put that out, but there was some too personally identifying info in there that we wanted to keep off. So, but the point is, we were talking about MK Ultra, and this is where that kind of links into. So that's that early childhood trauma, and it really creates what? Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I'll try to keep this short because
we'll just say that the trauma at an early age, what you were saying, well, we know that people will turn that off, so it becomes, it used to be, as you said, multi-personality disorder. Yeah. So they want to shatter people and then kind of reprogram them on a different personality. Right. And this was basically what the MK Ultra program was, and I'll let you take it from there. Go ahead.
Okay. So, a lot of people have heard of something called multiple personality disorder, or they've watched the movie Sybil. That was kind of one of the first movies out there. And there was a belief system that psychiatrists and psychologists or whatever, the world kind of put out, that this was just something that was a brain disease, basically, right? This was how people developed it. Well, that's really not true. What happened, and I'll try to make it short, and we can go into this at later times if people want more explanation or deeper explanation of this, is and I'll try to be really quick, but multiple personality disorder was created by humans. So it's not a broken person or a person that's absence of something in their brain. It was a created disorder. And so I'll explain that real short by saying that.
Well, no, take your time. I mean, this is foundational stuff, because this psychotic crap is what the basis of the whole MK Ultra CIA program is. And a lot of these wackos, and they're victims, but they're being used in order to go perpetrate crimes or actions, as kind of like third-party puppets, right? Third-party super soldiers in some demented way, right? Yeah. So, go for it. I mean, you said this started from Freud, and it was the Nazis, right?
Yeah. So, in a nutshell, and I'm not going to say I hold all the answers to this, but for a variety of reasons, I hold some of them. So, in a nutshell, after World War I, in Vienna, France, you had basically Stalin and Mussolini and Freud and Hitler and all those guys in there. And what was happening was these soldiers were coming back after World War I, and the ones that survived, and World War I was brutal. I mean, we didn't have the weapons we have now. I mean, it was just brutal warfare, right, in the trenches warfare. So,
and gas.
Horrible stuff. And so these soldiers that survived once the treaties were signed and the World War I was over, these soldiers that came home, they were displaying these very odd behaviors, both mental behaviors and even physical behaviors, such as catatonia, which is when a person can't move or they're frozen in a position.
Like catatonic, where you just like lock up, you're like a robot.
You're like a robot, or their arms are they'll be stuck in a position, just weird stuff. And these soldiers were coming back with this, and then a lot of them, of course, were killing themselves. And so Freud and Hitler, some of them, but Freud was the big guy that was studying this. He already had some labs and stuff going on in Vienna, and he was studying the brain, basically, right, the conscious self and all the things that people have heard about Freud and dreams and stuff. Well, what people don't know about Freud, or what's been cut out of history, is that Freud was a massive tyrannical pedophile, child rapist, and torture of children.
Yeah, you had told me that. Do we have any evidence of that? I mean, that's pretty amazing. That's like wow.
Yeah, there's tons of evidence, but you can even go back to his earliest what you would call discoveries, where he talks about the child's sexual needs, and he describes that as things like oral fixation and phallic fixation. And what he did was he projected. Projection is a psychology word, right? So projection is when you struggle with something, or something is within you, and you project it onto another human, right? You say that you say they.
You accuse them of doing it. You accuse them of believing it. Right. You accuse them of feeling it.
Right.
Sounds like what we're doing up in Congress these days.
Right.
Right.
Right. So what he did was, because he was abusing children, including his own daughter Anna, which Anna Freud is pretty well known, but he was severely abusing her. Instead of saying he had a problem. Wait. Is this where he came up with the whole thing on the penis envy thing? Yes. Unbelievable. That's what phallic, all right, go ahead. This is great. That's what phallic is another term for penis, but phallic. Well, I understand that, but you've heard of his theory of penis envy, that women suffer from this condition of penis envy. Absolutely right. And then he had a term called oral fixation, and they've tried to clean this up and hide this in history, but basically what oral fixation was is, a baby is born and they have the natural sucking instinct, right, to feed, because they don't have teeth and they can't eat.
Sure.
Right? So
there's a nice healthy breast there offering milk.
Right.
And that's how they get food.
It's a normal created process. And what he did was, because he was involved in child pedophilia, he took that sucking instinct and said, that's oral fixation, and that's a sexual need the baby is trying to express. So the baby, and the reason he did that was because there were babies and young children, sucking naturally on things that, I don't want to go into gory details, but instead of him saying, I've got a problem with this, he said, this child wants this, basically. This is what they want. Right. And so that sucking instinct is not because they need food, it's because they're having sexual desires even as infants.
And that's what he was saying. Right.
That's what he was saying. So that's what he was teaching also at that time. And so as all this was happening, and these soldiers from World War I are coming back and they're killing themselves and doing all these weird things, and people were looking at them saying they're broken or they're weak, right? That was kind of it was shell shock, but it was considered a weakness. So a lot of them were actually shot and killed because they were considered flawed. And people didn't understand. They thought, well, you actually survived. There would be soldiers that came back without a leg that sometimes were better, and you have soldiers come back with their full bodies, and they seemed broken inside, right?
Yeah.
And so Freud looked at that and said, wow, what if we could create like a laboratory, and we could learn what breaks a man, what breaks a human soul to this condition.
I see. So how did they get that way? What happened?
And so if we can do that, then we can do things that could train against it, right, and create something like a super soldier, right? So that was kind of the process of, let's learn what breaks them and what point breaks them, and then what can we do to maybe even to young children that will toughen them up against that breaking, right?
Okay, so let me stop you. Well, hang on. So what we're saying is he saw the problem, and what he wanted to do is figure out what caused it, and then kind of create the antidote or a defense against it. So this won't happen. That's where it started. That was the theory, to try and do a good thing. Okay, well that's good. So he wasn't a complete imbecile.
No, but the thing was, he wasn't. So you got to have a mixture. So that was part of it, and because that was part of it, you've got militaries that are very interested in that, right? Because they want to create the soldier that won't break, right? They want to not have this problem. And then you have him, who's a psychopath, who just enjoys breaking people, right? And using his disturbed and psychopathic desires to be able to basically do human experimentation, much like Hitler did in World War II in the camps. Just to be able to now nationalize it, right? So what we did in World War II, everyone looked at what Hitler was doing in the camps and said, "Oh my God, that's horrible," right? Once we learned of like what Dr. Mengele and all these people were doing. Well, Freud was actually doing the same thing, but decided to nationalize it under national security, right? So it would be protected under color of law. So instead of saying
it's secret?
Secret, right. So his laboratories and stuff were secret and still are. He still has a famous laboratory where a lot of this still comes from. I'm not going to name it on the phone, but it's in existence today. Not in our country, but there are over 200 satellites of it in the United States at one time. There's still, some of them are still in existence. So basically,
and these are the labs that they're doing to be, breaking people.
Right. So,
and it's done through how? It's done through massive trauma?
Yes. So in all mixed in it is there was knowledge that they took from how do I explain this?
Hold on. Let's back up. Let's stay with the timeline. So we're saying this started after World War I, and then in World War II, Hitler was doing it. But I guess is this in between the two? Is when he was doing national security tests under color of law on government things?
Well, it's kind of all involved. So a lot of people don't realize that Hitler was supported by a lot of our people in our country, politicians and people in the UK. And all over, Hitler was supported and involved. So some of these people were all involved together in this whole kind of deal together. So people want to believe Hitler was an island of it unto himself, but he was not. He was supported financially by a lot of our companies here in the United States. They built a lot of their tanks. We had Ford was doing business with Hitler.
Ford was doing it. Union Bank, wasn't it? And that's where
Prescott Bush.
Prescott Bush
was very involved. So a lot of that was going on and supporting Hitler. And as he was doing a lot of these experiments and stuff in these camps, that people turned a blind eye to it for a lot of different reasons, but they also were trying to take what he was doing out of these, not him, but his great scientists. It was cruel and just so horrific. I really can't even talk about it on the phone, but they were taking some of the results of these and trying to figure out kind of how to build, the super soldier or the
armies of these
the great spies, things like this.
Yeah.
Like how do you create an assassin? How do you create whatever you want, right? How do you create this? And so what they did was they came to a determination that, okay, you can take an adult, you can traumatize an adult and break them eventually, right? I mean, a lot of people will break after so much trauma, but really to really make it work great, you got to do it with kids, right? You got to get them young. And they started,
because they learn and they rebound quicker. And what you had said last time is like a little kid can learn multiple languages, and get them all fluently. When if you try and do that when you're 20, you can learn them, but it doesn't. It's not the same.
Right. So no, as people began to better understand the brain and how it learns and stuff, and they realized these things such as languages, for instance, if you take a child before they're 5 and 6 and you expose them to multiple languages, they can learn 5, 6 languages fluently and will retain it and keep it. And it's because the way the brain is coming together is growing. So to them that was very valuable, right? Because if you want to have a spy, and you want to be able to teach multiple languages, then you gotta take them when they're little kids. And so if you want to have...
So bottom line is you want to definitely mess with them when they're real young.
Right.
Right?
And so
that's where we start with this whole MK Ultra. And just to bring it up to speed, and I'm sure most of the listeners know this, that this MK Ultra is a CIA op, and that Operation Paperclip brought the top-level Nazis, what do we figure, about 10,000 to the U.S. undercover, gave them fake identities, and set them up in businesses, et cetera, et cetera. And I mean, I made a point of suggesting that none of our spineless senators in the confirmation hearing, what's her name, Haspel, asked her, oh, by the way, and are we still doing MK Ultra? We had the Church Committee hearings back in the 70s, and, that wasn't on MK Ultra. That wasn't on MK Ultra, was it? That was really more on the Mockingbird with the media.
No, it was actually it was actually on MK Ultra. They had children actually testify in the Church Committee.
And I know you and I have discussed this, and what I thought was fascinating. But I don't want to jump you out of line here. All right, so but I think a lot of people are up to speed on this stuff. So, but the early history of this is important. So the MK Ultra, they decided to do the programming young, and that's when they would do the what do we want to call it, the trauma, and that it's so severe that the victim basically turns their mind off. Right? How does that work essentially?
Okay. So what they saw, what Freud saw, and some other of his his buddies, I will say, were when they would rape a child or sexually assault a child and cause this kind of trauma, they would see this dissociation, right? And a lot of people understand what dissociation is. And multiple personality disorder has been changed now to something called DID, dissociative identity disorder, because it's not, they actually don't have separate personalities. What happens is the brain, just like it's a survival instinct, right? The child's brain can't handle both the pain and the trauma of what is occurring. So they dissociate, which is basically like making yourself travel to another place, right?
Right. You tune out. They're off.
Like,
they step out of their body.
Your body, right. And so they would see this, and they saw that as, wow, well, look what we could do with this, right? If we could create these and then kind of wall them off and then learn, teach these different, as the child is in a separate dissociative state, if we could code them or program them, that dissociative state, we could create these kind of multiple personalities within this child. We could have, like, this child be one personality is like the assassin, one personality is like the sex slave, one personality is, whatever they needed. So that's what they did. And why pedophilia comes into this, there's several reasons. Number one, the people that were doing it were just straight out pedophiles, okay? And we're learning that they're just
degenerate pervs. You're saying degenerate
pervs. And they were learning that as they were watching in real time, that as they acted out their behaviors on children, they saw dissociation and the splitting of the mind, right? So at the same time, there is this medical process that occurs, and is in old Egyptian religion. They knew this, and it was passed on through time, through secret societies and things like that. At the base of the spine, okay, is like the bundle of nerves to the brain, okay?
Okay.
And if you put pressure on the base of the spine, it sends signals up into what is called the pineal gland. The pineal gland is a gland that's in the kind of the forehead or forefront of the brain. It's called the third eye, okay? And the reason is because it's a part of the conscious and unconscious self, right? And when it's overloaded with pressure and chemicals and those kind of reactions, it causes this almost like a hallucinogenic state, right?
So when the third eye is opening, it becomes almost a hallucinogenic state. Right. Okay.
So what they learned was that sodomy, right? If you sodomize a child, because you're talking about an adult sodomizing a child who has a smaller body, that they would put pressure through sodomy on the base of the spine, and at that same time, that chemical reaction would occur, and that pineal gland would open, right? And they call it kind of like the God eye, the third eye, the open, that kind of stuff. So they would sodomize the child. So the child would be sodomized, and at the same time would experience this kind of all these hallucinations and dissociation, all this stuff at once. So
going into that spatial hallucinatory state while being abused.
Being abused.
And it's basically it's physiological because of the stimulation of the nerve bundle at the base of the spine. Internally. Internally opens the third eye, so the kid is being abused, and then the third eye is opening, so they're in this hallucinogenic state.
Right.
Okay.
And so what they would do is sodomize them, and in the process of the sodomy, as the child is in torment and dissociating and that third eye is open, then they would program them they would show them horror films. They would actually do snuff things in front of them. They would do animal killings. They would do satanic stuff in front of them to terrorize the child and to then program the brain into different whatever they wanted to do. Right?
Now I've had one of my viewers and subscribers, a camper, had put a comment out months and months ago about how she was victimized in a Masonic lodge, and what they did is they killed a puppy right in front of her and dripped the blood on her.
Yes.
Right, and said, whatever. I don't remember the whole story. It was horrific. Yeah. And I was like, I didn't even know what to say. My comment was like, wow, that's amazing. And, thank you for sharing that, But the point being that they would tell the kid, all right, if you tell anybody about this, we'll do this to you, or we'll do this to your family, or whatnot.
Right.
Additional terror.
Right.
Wow.
That's what they were doing, and that became the MK Ultra program, is programming these children and then killing animals, killing other humans, things like that in front of them, or even having them do it. Like they will take a child through sodomy and then get them in a terrorized state, and then they will do a killing, and they will take the child's hand at like 6, put it on the knife, put the adult's hand over the child's hand, and force the child into killing something.
Wow.
Force the child into being involved with blood rituals and stuff like that. And the child at that age doesn't understand, right? Their brains don't have the capacity to
and they're also in this like hallucinatory state as well.
Right.
Sure.
So,
talk about disassociating, of course. You want to turn that off.
It's absolutely horrific. And so they perfected that model over time. And then through Operation Paperclip, some of the very guys that were doing this were brought into our country and into Canada. And they were given they were brought into universities, hospitals, some of them. I mean, I have a list and know them, but I'm not going to
but McGill is one that comes to mind, wasn't it?
McGill is one of them that is known, right? But there are places still today. And these people, and I'll mention one guy, Kinsey. If you look at the Kinsey sex studies that were done in the United States in the 1950s, Kinsey had a lab here. He was a complete monster, and he did all kinds of sexual weird stuff with people and kids. And he was a Nazi paperclip guy, and he's considered the guy that brought in the whole sexual freedom and revolution of the United States. So he's actually a Nazi. And if you read his stuff, it's horrific. But that's the way.
I don't know. When I think of the sex studies, I think of Masters and Johnson, right? That was like normal.
No, but Masters and Johnson was also involved in this. Masters and Johnson.
But they didn't publish the crazy stuff. What did they do? They had like normal people doing it, and that was their study.
Right.
And then they had the crazy stuff going on also.
Yeah.
And that was published presumably under a classified title or a government program that was special.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. So
it sounds like Rosenstein's memo. We're not allowed to see what his memo says.
Yeah. So they have fronts, like their fronts, right, which would be like the public face. oh, we're just doing these studies to help men and women, have whatever, better relations.
Better sex.
But behind the scenes, and under color of law, they're doing these horrific experiments. And so that actually came out in the church committee in the 70s, 73, I think. And some of the kids testified, and then all of the records allegedly, the CIA destroyed all the records.
Imagine that.
Right, allegedly. And then they came before the senators, and everyone said, oh, we'll never do it again. Never do it again. Well,
we promise. Well, of course it's not true. Wait a minute. Wait. Because in that same stupid program, they have the mind control, which is all part of it, right? Mm-hmm. And what they have is they just released this within a month, about a month ago, under a FOIA request, and it was apparently accidentally released about this EMF frequencies to do mind control of people.
Right.
So this is the same thing. And what they're saying, and again, that was a question that I wanted to have one of our brilliant senators, spineless senators, speak to the candidate for CIA and say, what about these EMF? And the question would be, hey, if MK Ultra has been terminated, then what is this information that was just released 2 weeks ago? First you say, are you still doing it? Oh, no, that was stopped in the 70s. Well, how come 2 weeks ago this was released? Here's your exhibit. And, I know it wasn't stopped. So now you're gonna put this woman on as the job, but none of the assholes ask these questions, right? Because what? They're all compromised, or they all know what's going on. It's a wink, wink. What's your theory on that? What's the deal?
My theory is they're compromised. I know they're compromised, but besides that, a lot of them simply do not know this. So these are black budget programs. When the CIA came in, so the CIA was OSS, obviously, right? Office of, what is it? I can't remember.
Special Services or something.
Special Services. That was our spy agency pre-World War II. After World War II, the CIA, basically OSS, which was, what's his name? Oh, gosh.
Dulles.
I can't think of Dulles. So Alan Dulles, a lot of people don't realize this, but Alan Dulles was in England and Germany and all these different places as World War II was ramping up, and so he took guys like Carl Jung, right? Everyone knows Jungian philosophy, Jungian psychology. Dr. Carl Jung is known as like one of the fathers of psychoanalysis, that kind of stuff. He was friends with Freud, and he was involved in a lot of this stuff. He had some problems with some of it and did break off with Freud, but he really didn't stop a lot of it. And he was actually a CIA agent. He was Carl Jung, or Alan Dulles' agent 488. So a lot of the psychoanalysis, and if people remember, can think about how psychoanalysis used to be, where the doctor sat behind the couch, and the person laid on the couch and then told all their problems. And the psychoanalysis, the analysis would sit behind them and analyze it, right? Well, actually what that was, and it's hard for people to believe, but it's true, is Jung would get a lot of the, commanders and top military officers' wives and things like that into quote-unquote therapy or psychoanalysis to have them basically spill their guts. And he would...
To him or to Freud? So wait, they were spilling to him or to Freud?
They were spilling to Jung.
To him.
Jung was the kind of guy that said, "Oh, talk to me. I'll work this out in you." But basically, he was getting the secrets and blackmail. So he would pass it on to Dulles out the back door as a CIA agent, and then they would blackmail the lieutenants or the commanders, the people in charge. So
now these were on the American side or on the German side?
On all sides.
But they were talking to Jung. So again, with the timeline, Jung was over there. He was in Austria.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So it was mostly Germans and stuff like that. But it kind of became a way to. A lot of people were taught under that philosophy, and it became a way to do that with everybody, right? Now, I'm not saying
to build to blackmail people. Yeah, of course. Which is a perfect little segue there. Because we just found out a couple of days ago from True Pundit that Epstein was one of Mueller's informants, and he got off super light with like 20 charges of either pedophilia or soliciting or child prostitution. He pled to one. He got 30 months, and I think it was house arrest, right?
Yeah.
And he became an informant. Yet, where are all the investigations? Where are all the prosecutions? As opposed to, gee, I wonder where all those files are on everybody this guy worked with, undercover, videotape and film them and compromise them, which can be used as blackmail. So basically, it's following the same playbook you just described.
Yes.
A little different, but the same concept.
Yeah. But if you just look at all of that history and all that was done was just kind of refined, right, over time as it brought us to the United States. And so then I want to bring it, a little bit forward and say, here's kind of where we are now, right? So we can kind of, and I can go into more details about stuff in other conversations.
Yeah, we'll do it on another one. We don't want to burn everybody's clock too much today.
Right. And it's a lot
go
of
ahead.
information.
So bring it where we're at today. So. And
it's very disturbing, but the reason I'm sharing it is because it's going to come out. So here's where we are today. People need to understand these kind of different levels of where we are, right? So we have a national security program, right, that's covered under color of law that involves a lot of this stuff still. Now, MKUltra turned into Artichoke and Monarch. They name them all these kind of different names. And then they started using things like, lasers and EMFs and things like that to do the same kind of thing.
And they experimented with LSD as well. And what's wonderful, but I know, but the thing is, what's wonderful, and I say that facetiously, is these are not volunteers. I mean, some may have been on the LSD stuff, but they would just do this to people who were essentially victims. You didn't know it was happening. The EMF thing, and that was one of the questions that would have had our spineless senators ask the, what's her name? What the heck is her name? Haspel?
Haspel.
Haspel, yeah. And and then ask them, these people, were they volunteers or were they just victims that the agency's division just goes and attacks them to study them? Yeah. And that's what they did. It's outrageous.
That's what they did, and that's what they do now. I mean, they do that even with vaccinations and everything else. So they do that all the time.
And just wait. They're also putting chips in the military personnel. They're microchipping military. And I wanted to mention that in one of my episodes, and I found some interesting clips. It was like unbelievable. So this was the theory exposed by, what's his name, Russo, several years ago. And he had spoken with one of the Rockefellers. They said, no, they're going to microchip everybody. And they're going to have control over everything. Okay, so you'll have digital money and you'll turn them on or off the network. And they're already doing it in the military, right? And as well as the vaccine test, it's an outrage. That's the ultimate plan. So that's the ultimate control, because if you're chipped and you can't buy or sell or market or get anything out of a bank unless you have a chip, if you refuse to chip, how do you eat, right? How do you function? How do you get? That's the plan. Right. So anyway, I don't want to get if you're not in the system, if you're not in the system, you can't play in the system.
Right.
And if you're in the system, they can turn you off.
And if you're in the system, you've kind of sold your soul, basically. But I'll go into that in a different time. I'll tell you where we are at right now and why this is all coming out. So, over time, one of their goals during that time is, as it's coming through into the United States, and people really need to understand the Vatican is part of this, and how the Vatican was helping Hitler, and the CIA really was originally Catholics in action. The Vatican has always wanted to get a foothold in the United States. It's one of the reasons our forefathers came over here, was to break away not only from the church, but the royal family and the Vatican are kind of one and the same. In a way I can describe later how it's really connected. But
that's a whole other conversation, because then we have to mention our favorite family, the Rothschilds. Yes.
Right. But
we'll do another one on that. This is great. We should probably end this call soon and then continue it and call it part 2. Okay. But go ahead. So finish that point, because you had mentioned that. But this is important. You had mentioned that, and I thought that was laughable when you said CIA as Catholics in action. And a couple of viewers pointed out, this was amazing, that the Dulles brothers had a third brother who was in the Vatican. Well, now. I had to give you a well now. Oh, my God. So go ahead. I'll hush.
So here's kind of where we are now. So you've got a national program where you have government involved that is involved in doing this stuff, right? And some of these government players that are involved, because they're covered under color of law, some of them are much like Freud. They are just straight out perverts or psychopaths who, under cover of law, are allowed to do these horrible experimentations. Okay, so you have that level, right?
Right.
Some of them are psychiatrists that a lot of people would know by name if I mention them, and I won't, but they have a cover, right? Everyone thinks of them, they're these great trauma therapists or psychologists, and unbeknownst to them, they're contracted or they are CIA agents that are doing this stuff undercover. So then once you build the foundation of that, if you can imagine, and you're building all of your future political leaders are coming out of that system, basically what you have is a lot of Manchurians or severely traumatized individuals that they are rising up into the political system, right? A lot of these guys act out. So basically, you have people that have been totally traumatized, or they are just pedophiles or whatever, and because you can compromise them easily, they want to put them in places of power within our government. They want them to be senators and congressmen and presidents because you can control them, right? You've got dirt on them. They've already been brought up through whether Jeffrey Epstein's Island or wherever. There's videotapes, there's files, there's whatever. So they just say, hey, we'll put all the money behind you to put you in Congress, because when we want you to vote our way, we just show you a picture we have of you, right, or a video.
Right. So, and we remind you. Oh, remember this? Does anybody want to see this picture?
Right.
Yeah.
So you've got that group of people, and then you have this other kind of. So they're just the willing kind of participants, right? They willingly are involved in this stuff. They're just your straight out sick perverts. And then you've got your second.
Wait. They're straight out sick perverts who have done it and are provable, so they can also, in case they decide to gain a conscience, they can be steered back in the, quote, direction, unquote.
Right. Okay. If they wanted to, get out, they'll come to them and say, no, this is what you're going to do, because here's a picture. Yeah. So then you've got your guys that are just want to serve their country, help their country, whatever. They go to, they'll go to Washington, D.C., and someone comes to them, lobbyists or whoever, or other congressmen, and say, hey, you're new here, why don't you come to this party at this great, whatever mansion, and we're going to have a party to celebrate, blah, blah, blah. And maybe
or we'll have an initiation, where, hey, we're going to show you the new Congress people, the new senators.
Right.
Here's the initiation. What do they call that when you come in? You're new to the game,
Yeah.
What do they call that?
Initiation or a there's all kinds of names for it. Depends on what group you're associated with. But what they'll do is they'll bring them in, and then they'll roofie them. A lot of people know what roofie, like a drug, is. Or they'll put some sort of drug in their
slip them a Mickey, with a roofie or some kind of drug.
Right.
Yeah.
And then they're unconscious. They'll undress them. They'll bring in little children, and they'll pose them and do all these things, and then film them. And then once they wake up out of their drug coma, whatever, they show pictures and say, look, this is what happened.
Yeah,
right?
Look at you.
Now they say, now go back to Congress or go back to whatever position, and when we want you to vote a certain way or pass a certain bill or do something for us, they'll just come and say, hey, you're resisting. Here's this picture. Remember this?
Right.
Now these guys are
so
trapped.
it's straight up blackmail. Right.
Blackmail. Right. And they're trapped. This is not something they want to do. They don't realize it's going to happen to them. Right.
Right.
It's called being entrapped, and it is a violation of law for an officer or anyone to entrap somebody into a crime they would not normally commit. Right. But how do you get out of it? Because if this picture starts going around the world where you're with a little child, you can't get out of it. They're scared. And then
right.
if they even want to get out of it, they'll be threatened. Their lives will be threatened.
Yeah.
Their children will be
They can
threatened.
threaten them or their family
Right.
or their friends or economically, physically,
Right.
etc. Right. So it's a double whammy.
So all of that's going on in the government. And then besides all that, you've got this.
And we wonder why we call it the swamp, right? It's a cesspool.
Yeah. It's a cesspool. Yeah. And then besides all that, you've got the socioeconomic, how do I want to say it, standards that have been broken down intentionally, right? The rules, the normality of rules. And the people that are in charge of making sure that the morals and standards are kept up, like enforcing the laws against pedophiles, are in fact pedophiles, right? So they're not going to do a lot about it. So now you have you've got the web, you've got all this stuff, and you've got all these guys, these perverts, these guys, women, whoever, who are doing all this stuff with children, and nobody is enforcing these laws. So you literally have a country, a society, Western countries, that are they're drowning in this stuff right now. And the people that are supposed to be enforcing the laws and arresting them
and preventing the criminal activities are actually encouraging it.
Right. Even judges are encouraging or not doing anything or letting them off, or they are connected somehow, and they call up the judge and say, hey, because the judge is black and white, say, hey, we got a picture of this. You need to let this guy off, right? So that's what's going on in our country. The bottom scroll of all this that's going to come out, the evil of unevil, is not just the people that are involved in the child molestation and the pedophilia. You actually have Satanists that are involved, and they aren't just Satanists that are playing the game of Satanists. They are Satanists. They believe in the stuff, and they are using ceremonies and ritually abusing children for satanic rituals and doing other horrible crimes. And I won't get into any more than that right now. So there you go.
Okay. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, there's a couple of other points here. And in one of our private conversations a while ago, we were talking about all of these people in the MK Ultra program, which has been going on for years, that they're not 5-year-olds and 3-year-olds and 7-year-olds anymore. They're all in their 40s and 50s. And we were saying that what happens is that the brain matures, and that boundary that is the separated, the disassociation, goes away. So now these people are becoming conscious and can talk about it. So you're going to have an army of people who are victims who can now come forward and speak about it. So what happens is when they do, they'll be, you're crazy, or this one's nuts. And or people will be so afraid to do it that they'll be afraid they'll be accused of being nuts, or they're also being threatened, right?
They're also they are in targeted programs. So there are people that are assigned to them, just like there are people that are assigned to those of us that are whistleblowers, to target them, make damn sure they keep their mouth shut.
Right.
So you've got two things. You've got people that have been victims that go kind of the opposite way, right? They never really recover, or they go kind of into, I would say, evil, right? That's how they react out of it. And then you've got a whole group of people who were also victims, but for reasons that, are very complex. As their brains begin to kind of heal, they are becoming whole, right? There's help for them. There's help for their trauma, but getting help for them is very difficult because the people assigned to keep them quiet don't want them to get help, right? They don't want these stories to come out because
of course, they want them isolated.
Right. They want them isolated. So you've got whistleblowers who are isolated, right? The people that have seen it and tried to stop it, they're isolated and targeted. The victims are isolated and targeted. And the people that are in control and have all the power are actually the ones that are either blackmailed or involved intentionally. That's our system right now.
Wow.
And it is very, very difficult to solve.
My reaction might have to require adult language in their task force. I mean, that's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Wow. So, okay, before we close, what's the fix?
Yeah, before we close.
In your view, Senator.
Right.
what's
the hope,
fix?
Right?
Yeah, how do you fix it?
Yeah, the fix is that the only way to get back to any semblance of normality is you've got to clean out the justice system and the law enforcement system, the FBI and the law enforcement system that are involved in this. You've got to get rid of them because you have to have a law enforcement and justice system that will try these cases, right, and enforce the rule of law and put these people put these people away. And you have to have the system within national security that is willing to stop the unethical, illegal experimentation that is being done on people. And so do we have that now? I think we have, for the first time, we have some hope of that. There is light about that. And
that's really what the Q thing is about.
Yeah, the Q thing, and I think, some people might hate Trump, but I think for reasons I know that I can't explain, there's some hope there. So there's a big chasm, though, between us, which I would say us would be whistleblowers, former law enforcement, victims, those kind of people, targeted people, and the top people that can help, right? The people in between are all the blackmailers and the silencers and the threateners, right? So to get us to them, we've got to get rid of the chasm, or the people standing in the gap. So takes time, it takes patience, it takes courage by both the victims, the silenced, the threatened, and the American people who will just simply stand up and say enough is enough.
Right.
And we're gonna.
So exposure. Yeah. So it has to be, but they have to become aware of it first of all.
Right, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, even though it's a great risk to me. I know that, and I've been attacked, and I won't get into that. I know there's a huge risk. So do the other whistleblowers. So do the victims. But if we don't say something now, we will never have a chance. So we're doing it, and our hope is that the American people that we are beginning to expose this to will come behind us and join with us and say enough's enough. And take on the system. And that's the goal of exposure.
Excellent.
So that's why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Wow. Well, that's a good blurb.
Yeah.
If we were doing this live, we could do questions. Of course, since I've got this on the phone here, I can't control the thing. So I think the way we'll end this is we'll have to actually end the call. Okay. And then I will give you a call back. Yeah. And maybe we'll continue and we'll do a great review. Well, thank you. That was an excellent blurb. I wanted to ask one more thing on the DID and these MK Ultra victims. And they are victims, but then they become used as puppets, right?
Yeah.
But when you see them, they are the DID people. So as a therapist or as a psychologist, is there a difference in seeing somebody who has just been traumatized and is DID versus somebody who has been programmed to DID, and how you unravel that? Or is that too much of a discussion for right now?
That's a big discussion, but there is a difference, yes.
Okay. So the short answer is yes. All right, and we can discuss that the next time, and we'll discuss how we're going to discuss that next time. How's that?
I'll say there's a difference, but there is tons of similarity too. So there's, it's complicated, but we can talk about how I've worked with that and what you actually see, what the truth is about what you see when you see them, right?
So you'll know if somebody's been programmed and victimized as opposed to somebody who's just suffered normal trauma, for lack. Versus somebody who's been intentionally abused to create that DID.
Yeah, and you also will know how DID will present itself and how you can, even as just somebody not trained, can look at it and see past the DID. I'll explain that at some point.
So we have something to look forward to, campers. Yeah. And on that note, we'll call it an end. Thank you very much again, and I'll give you a ring back in a second. All right?
All right. Thank you, campers. See ya.
All right. Bye now.
All right.
Bye.